The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
Karla Combres is a certified life cycle celebrant, ceremony guide, facilitator, and speaker. She helps people to honor and celebrate life's big moments, the joyful beginnings and the difficult endings, and everything in between. She believes in the transformative power of meaningful, authentic, story-based ceremonies to connect and inspire us as we move through life's transitions. After spending over a decade living, working, and studying in other cities and countries, Karla is grateful to make her home once more in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan on Treaty 6 territory and the home of the Métis, along with her husband and 3 beautiful children. Karla believes connection happens below the surface, when we get to the heart of a person, a situation, or a person's story. Karla discusses today how we can live well so we can pass on well. She has experienced that when guiding her clients through the journey of death and dying, the only thing that matters is, did they love and did they love others well? Karla is a great example of someone who has learned to live well, love well, and share what she's experienced with others around her to make their lives better. Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Connector Next Door, and welcome to Karla, for all the way from Saskatoon, where I was born and raised. So glad you're here.
Thank you for having me, Lisa.
I lived some of my best years biking around downtown in Saskatoon, and it's just fantastic how there are connectors all over the world, all over Canada. I just want to jump right in and ask you, what does connection mean to you in your world? And then we'll talk a little bit about your work later on in the conversation.
Connection means to me feeling seen and understood, and getting past the mundane and getting to what's at the heart of a person, of a situation, of someone's story. It's kind of like below the surface level. Getting to below the surface level for me is where the connection happens.
Putting that in the context of the work that you do, below the surface matters so much. So I saw something on Instagram that you posted just recently, and it was about, I believe, a workshop that you're running. And it was this idea of living well so that we can pass on well, something like that. Can you maybe share with us a little bit about your work and why that kind of a topic matters to you?
Sure. If I needed to give the simple, short elevator answer to that, it would be how we live really matters. And the workshop that you're referring to was an opportunity to kind of look at how we're living and to clarify what matters, who matters, and to kind of get to that point to help us clarify, we contemplated our own mortality, which is something that, a lot of people feel uneasy about. It's not an easy topic, but the idea is that, death is our greatest teacher. And that when we really think about it, in the end, the only thing that matters is, did I love and was I loved? Did I love well and was I loved well? And connection is all about that, right? Like the people that are in your life, the impact that you made, all of that centers around connection.
When you first talked about connection and the idea of going beyond the mundane, going beyond maybe what we see on the surface to something deeper. And it is some of those big, huge milestones in our lives that sometimes we don't prepare for, but it almost calls us to deeper, whether we're ready for it or not. When I look at just what I've learned about you online and done some reading about the work that you're doing, the beauty of it for me is that you're there as a guide through it. It's not that we have to do that alone. which when we talk about connection and connection in the context of the work that you do, that does feel like a lonely part of life for many people.
Mm-hmm.
And even the idea of going deeper, we need people, we need a community, or we need somebody that allows us to go there and test it out and actually ask those difficult questions.
Right.
How did you get into this type of work? Did you choose this? Do you feel like it kind of chose you in your life direction?
Oh, yes and yes. So as a kid, if you had asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I used to say I wanted to be a part-time preacher, part-time teacher. And I remember that very clearly, even though I don't think I had a sense then really what that meant. I didn't grow up in a religious family, although I did go to Catholic school more for practical reasons because of, the French and all of that. But I've always been a real seeker and a spiritual person, and love meaningful conversations and existential questions, and not necessarily searching for answers, but just appreciating and enjoying the questions. And so that's always been a thread since the very beginning. And then, I went through school and did all the things that you do. And at some point, I feel like I kind of went off of my path a little bit and ended up working with the federal government for a number of years, and kind of kept trying to get closer and closer to what I wanted to do. I was working in public relations first, then I got into sort of the cultural sector, and then within the immigration integration sector of like creating welcoming communities. So I was trying to really still follow my heart and get closer to what I wanted. And I think I got about as close as I could get, and it still just didn't really fulfill that need inside of me for meaningful connection and impact. I felt like I was a cog in a machine. And then I had children, and that is a big transformation. And then we moved away from Ottawa. We moved to North Carolina, where my husband was doing some studying. And it was like that was a real time of like a metamorphosis for me, because I was away from government. I was home with kids. I thought, this is my chance to kind of figure out a different way. I just tried to tune into what my heart was saying. And I was part of a kind of a loose singing community there, folk singing community. And there was this one woman who I just loved her energy, and she was a grief and bereavement counselor. Her name is Métis. And I took her out for coffee, or I, went to her workplace or something. And I said, I just want to talk with you about your path. I'm just interested in your path. I wasn't necessarily thinking grief and bereavement would be for me, but there was something about her. Anyway, and she planted the seed that I might enjoy hospice, because I knew I wanted to do something that was heart-centered and where connection was possible. And that kind of spoke to me. So I started volunteering with Duke Hospice when we were down there. And then I heard about death cafes, started attending death cafes. And then we moved back here to Saskatoon. I started hosting death cafes and started volunteering with hospice. And then I became sort of the death girl. Everybody was like, well, you're into death. So
can you tell us what a death cafe is? I've never heard of them.
Yeah, a death cafe is a community event, sometimes open to the public, sometimes groups organize their own. There's no cost associated. The idea is when you host it, you're not selling any products or services or religion. There's no proselytizing. It's really about creating a safe and comfortable space to talk about anything related to dying and death and mortality. And it's called a cafe, death cafe, because there's always something to break bread over: tea, dainties, coffee, whatever, to kind of create a comfortable space. And the first one I ever attended in North Carolina, I thought, who is going to show up to this? This was that Death Cafe started in the UK by a fellow named John Underwood in 2011. And so it was still pretty new. It was about 2012 or 13 when and now they're all over the world all the time. But I thought, who's going to show up? But it was really a neat mix of people. And here in Saskatoon too, we would have, you would need to register for your ticket. It was free, but just so we could organize the space and stuff. And the tickets would just go really quickly. After the first one, then people were wanting more. People want to have these discussions. People want to explore these questions with other people, because it's so easy, like you said, we all experience these big transitions, and sometimes it feels lonely to be human in the modern world, right?
Yeah.
So there was Death Cafe, there was hospice, and then someone heard about a home funeral practicum that was coming up. Oh, Karla, maybe this is something you would be interested in. So I took that and learned all about vigiling at bedside and community-led death care, and the beauty that can be when you keep your loved one at home for a short time after. And then I love to sing, and someone said, have you heard of Threshold Choir? And so together with a person here in Saskatoon, I founded a local chapter of Threshold Choir, which is singing at the bedsides of the seriously ill and dying in homes, in hospitals, in care homes, and did that for several years until just, recently with the pandemic, I've stepped away to focus more on my work, but it's still very near and dear to me, and something I can definitely see myself doing again at some point. At one point, my dad said to me, "You're really into death, eh?" And I could see why he would think that, or why anybody might think that, because of everything I was doing. But what I was really doing was just kind of trying to follow these crumbs, these sparks inside that were interesting for me. Anyway, long story short, I ended up finding out about celebrancy, because when my dad asked me that question, it made me think, like, isn't that what I'm really interested in? And I realized, yes, it is. Death. What I love about that period of all of our lives is that if you haven't already done the work, then that's going to force the conversations, the getting clear on what matters, the reflections on, have I lived a good life? Did I contribute? All of those things. But I am actually interested in the whole lifespan and making that happen all along the way. So when I discovered the path, that celebrancy was a thing, and that I didn't need to belong necessarily to a faith tradition, and that I could work with people at those key moments throughout their lives. But I feel like I'm on the right path for sure.
Yeah. And even when you're talking about it, you do seem very alive. And when you were talking to people and exploring conversations with people that inspired you, it was their aliveness. It was what they were bringing to the world. And sometimes we forget that the living happens until we die. There is so much life left to live. Even through some pretty hard times in my life, I used to say, there's more to come. There's more to come. Years ago, I was at a book show, and one of the books I picked up, brought it home and started working through it. And it turned out to be writing your memoirs. And I'm like, oh, well, that's really kind of interesting. I was 35 at the time. And the exercise was that you actually wrote a line, and then you had a 5-year increments along that line. And you actually did some work around from 0 to 5. What were your highlights? What were those milestones? What were things that you're going to remember? And at the time, I was going through a really hard time in life and trying to make some enormous changes in my life. And I was going 5 years old, 10 years old, 15. And I had this really long line. And I got to 35, and I'm like looking at the rest of the line thinking, I don't know what's going to happen, how long this line is going to be, but I'm making a decision today that whatever's left, I'm going to lean in, have my voice, feel more alive than I have felt for many years. And it was just that I think there was a turning point for me to say, it's not over yet. And I don't know what this is going to look like. I felt like an old woman in my mid-30s, just the circumstances. But I think we all have that ability with a guide like yourself, someone like yourself, to come alongside and say, what is the deeper story here for you? What is happening for you? And even your story of choosing or that it chose you in a way, the work that you do today is so beautiful, because you've allowed something that has been this little spark inside of you, that light inside of you, and you've just followed it to a point where now it's showing itself in a way that looks a little like a job, looks a little like your career, it looks like something that you can contribute to the world, which many of us, I think we don't take time to listen maybe, or take time to go a little bit deeper, like you say, below the surface. What was the most difficult part for you in letting yourself go there, follow the crumbs, like you were saying?
Letting go of the stability and just trusting, surrendering, definitely. Allowing uncertainty. It's a learning to follow that spark without knowing what it's going to look like. But then when it actually is concrete and you're quitting your job to follow that spark, it's another thing entirely.
That's right. There must be a real satisfaction or a joy even, I don't know if that would be going too far, in seeing people become very real about what that looks like. We don't know when we're going to pass, but what is that change for some of your clients, the people that you work with, when they either come to a workshop or to a death cafe, or they're just working with you one-on-one? What is that change you see in them?
It's interesting because in this last workshop, it was something that came up about how when you follow that spark, or people feel it in different ways, but for me it's kind of almost like a full body tingle, and I can feel my heart pumping my chest. It's like, okay, I need to do this. It's hard, it's scary, but I gotta go with it, and then usually unfolds in a beautiful way. So it's a gift to yourself to follow it, but it's actually also a gift to the world, because those people that I took out for coffee were a gift to me. And now I can pay it forward, and we are so interconnected that when we follow that aliveness, when we listen to our center, it gives permission or strength to others to do the same. And I think in terms of the ceremony work, as a society, this is a generalization, but we've become quite disconnected with those milestone moments. A lot of people think now, okay, ceremony, they think wedding or funeral, and that's about it. Whereas, for thousands of years, and a lot of Indigenous cultures, especially, and other societies, are still more connected with the seasonal cycles, the life cycles, and so on. But I'm going to just generalize here and say wedding, funeral, maybe baby blessing. But other than that, people don't necessarily think to mark all these things. So we've kind of forgotten what it can be like, and become very scripted in what a wedding looks like, what a funeral looks like, usually a wedding has become about how much money you spend on the flowers and the venue and the dress and the Pinterest board, right? It's very aesthetic. And a funeral, often when people think of what a funeral looks like, it's like, just get it over with, because it's, a lot of people have been to bad funerals, and it's not about the person, or, it doesn't reflect them in any way. And so people don't necessarily know what's possible. And so when they have that experience, it's like a remembering, when you say that I'm a guide to be with people along, I do think that, but I think we all have it in us, and it's about it uncovering and revealing what we already know, because we are ritual beings, we are social beings, we are connected to each other, and it's like remembering what's possible.
Yeah. So when you talk about that we're ritual beings, I love that. I'd love to explore that a little bit. How does that actually create connection in communities or in a culture?
Again, it takes us out of the routine, out of where we just sort of are coasting through life with our blinders on, and opens a space where we pay attention and we set intention. Those are the sort of main kind of things, paying attention and intention. And it's like a special time set apart. I'll give you an example. My mom's 70th birthday. We had her siblings over, some of her oldest friends, please come to our home to celebrate my mom for her birthday. And it could have been what we're used to seeing, which is we give her a toast and we light the candles on the cake. She blows them out, and gifts, we're all very familiar with that. But I invited people to come with a story about mom. Think of a quality that you love about her and a story to go with it. And so they came knowing, and they came prepared. And then at a certain point, we went around the table and each person shared I get teary just thinking about it. It just, time kind of stands still, right? Ritual doesn't have to be religious. It doesn't have to be super serious. There were laughs during that time, but it just made it made it sort of set apart, a time that was set apart. So your question was about how it connects us. Well, I think it kind of speaks for itself there. Just that the connections were deepened in that moment.
And I think we are in an increasingly disconnected world. And I think in many ways, I'm an entrepreneur, and I think a lot of people that might be listening to this might be running solo here in Calgary. A lot of people, we weren't born or raised here. A lot of people don't have family in town. The idea of a ritual or tradition, I was telling my husband, I do 2 things in a year that I learned when I was a single mom for my girls. So they're adults now. But one is Christmas Eve. We've always had a Christmas Eve something. And part of that tradition was a theme tree. We moved a lot. So we had a dog park branch once, we had a lamp once, we had it wasn't always a tree, but it had some kind of a theme. So it just has sort of lived on since then. And the other one was Easter Sunday. So I'd always do a riddle hunt or some kind of a scavenger hunt. My husband was born and raised here, has family here, a lot of nieces and nephews here. And we were having this conversation just over this last Easter. And I said, it's these 2, for some reason, these 2 rituals or these 2 traditions that I tried to build back then. I tease now because they actually wouldn't let me get away with not doing the riddle hunt, and they're 27 and 23. So I had them running around with bunny ears this year, down the street, and, they have to endure if they want the treats. What a beautiful example with your mom's birthday, where it could have been very familiar and something that wouldn't have been as impactful or meaningful. But adding that layer of connection, probably everybody that was there might feel, they're all going to have a different perspective on it, but probably feel like that was meaningful for everybody there, not just for her. Which, when we look at rituals in the sense of, I've never really thought about it that way, but as ways of gathering us together, not just confining us into, this is the box that we all want to be in. It's a deliberate action for us to come together. And then what do you do with it? Which is, it seems like that's a big part of your work, to have that conversation with people. Well, how can we actually put this together, craft something that is going to be very meaningful?
Yeah. I absolutely. And I would add that a big part of my work are centered around those milestone moments, the big things. And what a big part of my interest and what I'm doing more of now too is looking at, what about outside of those big moments? Where you talked about that story exercise, your 0 to 5, 5 to 10, that kind of thing. It's what happens in the day-to-day that shapes those stories, that gets us to those milestone moments. That's where that awareness of orienting our lives, despite the busyness of being an entrepreneur or whatever we have going on in our lives, is bringing that mindfulness, that intention to our day-to-day. Again, it doesn't have to be serious or burdensome. It can be playful and fun and freeing, but just it's that. And again, that's where our mortality is such a great teacher, and there's so much wisdom in that, because what we do every day is what's shaping our story, what's getting us to our deathbed, whenever that might be, to look back and have we actually lived? Have we made the most of our life?
In the context of, you were talking about those milestones and how there's many milestones along the way that shape how we remember parts of our life. And the ones that are listening today are those that are planning and promoting their own events. And I call events connection points, because it's not just the one hit wonder, the one thing or the one tradition or the one time of year, but it's how are we creating connections over time. In the work that you do, I believe it sounds like you're gathering people together, come together as families, maybe even as communities. What are some of those connection points that you make sure that you're, whether it's a death cafe or the singing, what are some of those really strong connection points that you want to keep moving through and be known for as a celebrant?
Again, I mentioned before, people don't know what's possible necessarily. I love working with people who think of the ceremony as the heart of the day, or who realize that the ceremony is the heart of the day. And even still, some of those people still don't necessarily know what it takes to get to that point of it actually being a meaningful ceremony. You know, you can go online and see a ton of officiants' websites that say, I'll personalize your ceremony. Choose, do you want a rose ritual, a sand ceremony, a lighting of the candle? You know, this is suddenly very personal. But unless those things actually somehow reflect your story, your values, your beliefs, they're just like a choose your own adventure kind of ceremony.
Right.
So the connection points along the way are about getting into the story and the values and the beliefs. So there are several touch points, whether I'm working with a couple or with a family, honoring a loved one who's died. It's about diving into the story so that we can find that essence of the person, of the couple, not only the couple necessarily in the wedding, but their community and how they have played a role in shaping them, so that all of that is what the ceremony is shaped out of, not by a checklist.
Yeah.
So I would say that, and this is what I'm, trying to get better at articulating, is that it's the process, not just the day and that 1 hour or whatever of the ceremony. It's what it takes to get to that point. And people who then have worked with me can look back and go, oh, like that was really meaningful.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for being here, Karla. It's just been a gift to have this conversation with you. Yeah. I would love for people to be able to reach out and know where to find you. Are you willing to have people reach out and have this conversation, continue the conversation?
Absolutely.
And if so, how do they do that? How do they get
it? There will be more workshops. Not everyone's looking to plan a wedding or a funeral right now, but there are other micro things that they may not need to hire a celebrant to do, but having a conversation like this one-on-one can be very clarifying for people. So I am available for that ceremony guidance, kind of one-on-one or hourly as well. People can find me at my website, which is just my name.com. So it's karlacombres.com, Karla with a K. And on Instagram and Facebook at Karla Combres Celebrant.
If you're listening today, and no matter where you are in life and you feel like having this conversation would be valuable, I already feel like the half an hour or so that we have been in conversation today has been a real gift to me. Karla, thank you so much. It helps me reset. This is a Monday, and allows me to think about what really could this week look like. What could today look like that could really make a difference and make it more meaningful, even as we move through this week. So thank you again for being here. Loved having you.
I'm glad that it was a good conversation for you. It definitely was for me. And I hope it's the first of many, Lisa. I hope we can stay connected. And
me
not
too.
That far away. You just
no, we aren't that far away. Maybe I'll have to come take a road trip through the prairies and come for a visit.
And you're going to Moscow soon. Yeah,
exactly. That's right.
Thank you, Lisa.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.